You know his name from the credits, from cult wrestling classics like The Wrestler. But his newest project, 350 Days, is one you need to watch. It's highly recommended. My one-on-one sit-down interview with producer Evan Ginzburg begins now.
238 pounds in the black corner. From St. Louis,
here comes Mr. Pro.
Andre the Giant.
Gonna get his licks in on the bruiser.
Hulk Hogan.
Number one, the greatest WWE champion of all time, and in many ways, the man who made the title what it is today, Bruno Sammartino.
His opponent, weighing 236 pounds in the white corner. From Van Nuys, California.
And thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule, your busy night, to come on the program and just talk about. I mean, I've watched The Wrestler. That was a great movie. We'll get into that in a little bit. But 350 Days, I just finished it. We'll definitely get touch on it a lot in the end. But to kind of start out, growing up, was wrestling something that you watched as a kid growing up, or was it something that you kind of fell into later on in life?
I'll tell you exactly what happened. In the old days, we did not have thousands of channels. Basically, we had 13 channels and a UHF dial. So it was a rainy Sunday afternoon. I was bored out of my mind. This was pre-internet, pre-video games. You're talking 1972 or so. And I'm just flipping the UHF dials. I'm so desperate for entertainment. And there's this Indian getting pounded in a ring by this much larger guy. And I literally didn't know what I was watching. It was Chief Jay Strongbow on the old WWF TV just taking a beating. And all of a sudden, he goes into this herky-jerky kind of war dance, and he pins the much larger man. And, like, my mouth was hanging open. I had never seen anything like this. So, of course, I watched the rest of the show and figure out when it's on and watch it again and again. And it becomes this addiction. And we had an old black and white TV, and maybe 2 years later, June of 1974, my dad takes me to Madison Square Garden, and the main event is Nikolai Volkov and Fred Blassie, who had unbelievable charisma, against Bruno and Strongbow. And it was in color. It was like Marvel's superheroes and supervillains come to life. And it was just amazing. And the crew that they had back then, Killer Kowalski and Pedro Morales and the Valiant Brothers, Dean Ho, Tony Gurria, it was just unbelievable. And as a kid, a total mock. I thought it was all real. And I was just, in love with the whole thing. And my dad started taking me pretty much every month, Madison Square Garden, Nassau Coliseum, Westchester County Center, all New York area venues. And, the wrestling in the 70s was just tremendous. And if you talk to older fans like myself, I'm in my late 50s, they'll tell you that going to wrestling was something you did with your dad, your mom, your grandparents, your uncle, whoever it is, and it's among your greatest childhood memories. And, I just have this deep love and respect for professional wrestling. And unbelievably, many of the guys who were on that show became dear friends eventually. Nikolai, who ironically died a year ago today, Kowalski, Johnny Valiant, Jimmy Valiant. These guys became friends. And you never would have imagined it as a kid with your mouth open at Madison Square Garden.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you said, growing up as a kid, going to that was my greatest memories. I remember my grandmother, my father's mother, taking me to see the National Wrestling Alliance at the Omni here in Atlanta, Georgia, and her getting up on the chair and just screaming at the wrestler because it was back probably the maybe 81, 82 when we went there. And I was, like you said, a total mark. I thought it was real. My grandmother was really into it. It's just one of those things that I will cherish for the rest of my life. It's one of those kind of bonding things. But speaking of bonding, I mean, growing up watching these wrestlers and then becoming friends with them, was that something that you just couldn't believe? I mean, how did you become, close friends with a lot of these wrestlers that, that are in the documentary? I mean, earlier on in your life.
Well, what I've learned in life is whatever you do leads to something else. And I was an early sheet editor, pre-internet. I put out a monthly sheet called Wrestling Then and Now, and it was more history-based and more writing passionately about pro wrestling. And I did this for about 20 years, and it had its cult following. It was never the Observer or the Torch or anything like that, but it had its following. And suddenly, I would say, Mr. Kowalski, would you want to write something for us? We'd be honored. And I was shocked for him to say yes. And eventually you're sitting in the room with Killer Kowalski, and he's your friend. And same thing from doing the sheet. One of my readers was a radio guy, Fred Geobold, 50,000 watts, WBAI-FM, New York City. And he was like, Evan, why don't you come on my show and do a weekly wrestling segment? I would love to, Fred. So now you're doing radio on a 50,000 watt New York City station, and again, hey, Johnny Valiant, you want to come down to the station and do an interview? And you're shocked when the guy says yes. And you bond, and you meet people, and you wine and dine with them, and they become your friends. And what I've learned in life is one person always is in awe of what the other person does. Like, to me, it was unbelievable that somebody could get in a ring and perform in front of 22,000 people. To them, they were impressed you were on a radio station in New York City, which to me was just talking, but to them, they took you seriously and as a peer. So it was interesting how the friendships evolved and developed, and then one day Johnny Valiant's sleeping on your couch and you're booking him for autograph appearances and et cetera, so on. And one thing always leads to another.
Yeah. I mean, I figured that out in my. So I was a ring announcer for 21 years in Georgia, and just most of the guys, there are a lot of guys I'm sure that you've met that you wouldn't want to, do wine and dine or have sleep on your couch at your house. But most of the guys, most of the brothers and sisters in wrestling are great people. I mean, I became good friends with Wildfire Tommy Rich and a guy that was in the documentary, Abdul the Butcher. I mean, these people were just, they're monsters and they're, total superstars on TV. But then when you get to know them, they're just normal people that have a really weird profession. But yeah, it's one of those things, like you said, one thing leads to another. I mean, you never know, whoever you're talking to could lead to something else. So.
And it's the same thing down the road, as you go about doing things, it leads to other things. And Johnny Valiant taught me, saying no closes a door, saying yes opens a new door. So when people pitch you things, really, really consider it, because it could lead to, great things. Johnny used to say, enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride. It's not always about the money.
No, it's at least for me, it's not about the money. I mean, I've had some great friendships that people that I that I would trust more than, say family members or other people that are in the business that, I would leave my 4-year-old son with. You don't see that a lot in life. So, I mean, it's one of those things. And one of my good friends, Bill Apter, who we were hanging out in New York at WrestleCon at WrestleMania 35. Yeah, he's another guy that, I grew up reading his dirt sheets, reading stuff in the magazines, and just becoming good friends with him. You never know. I mean, I think in professional wrestling, I mean, I like that in anything in life, but especially
Bill's a good man. I know Bill. Bill's been very supportive of everything we've ever done, and I was at WrestleCon with Greg Valentine and Coco Beware. We were working with them all weekend.
Yeah. I mean, I was there too. We had a booth, so I'm sure we passed by each other. We were right next to Hacksaw Jim Duggan, so it was a great time, and I mean, it's just one of those things. And I've learned that in professional wrestling, you don't want to make people mad, at least on my end, because that's when the opportunities kind of they kind of stop coming in. But like you said, you make the opportunities of whatever you can. But speaking of opportunities, The Wrestler, that was I think it's a cult classic. It's a great movie. It's one of those movies, folks. If you're listening, if you've not seen it, rent it, buy it, whatever medium that you have to get it. It's a great wrestler. How did you become intertwined and in that project?
Well, exactly what I've been saying. I was doing an autograph appearance as an agent with Nikolai Volkov and Johnny Valiant, both gone now tragically. It was like a 1-2 punch. They both died within months of each other. And we were doing this appearance, and the executive producer, people get confused with the titles. The executive producer is the money guy, the guy who, makes all the financial deals and gets the funding for a film. Scott Franklin's best friend happened to be at this appearance. And he says to us, you guys would be perfect for this project. Darren Aronofsky is doing a film about professional wrestling. We exchanged information. I didn't think all that much of it. Whenever you do appearances, you're always exchanging business cards and meeting people, and I didn't hear from them for a while, and a couple of months go by, and I get a phone call. Would you like to meet with Darren Aronofsky, Scott Franklin, the screenwriter, et cetera, so on. And we had this meeting, and I go down there with Nikolai Volkov and his manager, Nikita Brezhnikov. He just put out a wrestling book. Tiger Khan, who's also gone now. Johnny Valiant. And we're all just sitting and talking and laughing and drinking and having a good time and bonding, just like I've been saying. And we just hit it off. And, Johnny and Nikolai were funny, intelligent, warm human beings, and they just regaled them with various, road stories. And Johnny was talking about being in the middle of riots where, fans were literally, stomping them. There was a riot up in Canada where the fans actually, they were killing him, and Butcher Paul Vachon runs out. He was a big, strong guy. He's in 350 days, and Butcher Paul Vachon pretty much saved Johnny's life. But the way Johnny tells it, or told it, was funny. But at the time, when guys are stomping on your head, it's not that funny. So again, some time goes by, and I get a call. Would you like to be the associate producer on The Wrestler? And the associate producer basically works for the producer and provides them with whatever they need. And in this case, what did they need? I did 5 or 6 casting calls, bringing in 150 or so different wrestlers for them to meet and choose from and to read for them, and the ring and Mickey's stunt double and Mickey's trainer, etc., so on. I was basically the wrestling guy. And I took them to indie wrestling shows every weekend pretty much for 6 months, because Aronofsky wanted it right. He really wanted to capture it, and we were even backstage at a CZW Cage of Death show, and it was like a MASH unit back there. It was crazy, and I took them to a wrestling convention. So there's Moolah, Mae Young, Captain Lou, Nikolai, Sheik, Johnny, etc., so on, and there's like nobody there. There's nobody there. It's just these legends and maybe 2 or 3 dozen fans. And it was really sad and depressing. And Iron Sheik's head was literally down on the table sleeping. That's how bad it was. And to make a long story short, that was not in the original script. So Rob goes home. I guess he was disturbed by the whole thing, writes it into the script. And to make a long story short, I'm on set one day, and Darren gets this smirk, and he goes, "Evan, come here." And I go, "Yeah." And next thing I know, he has me acting in that depressing autograph scene, which was based on the convention I took them to. And he goes, "Evan, just work the tables and walk up to Mickey last, ask him for an autograph and a Polaroid." And Mickey whispers in my ear, he goes, "Just improv it." He thinks I'm an actor. I've never acted in my life. So there I am. There's like 125 people on set, these giant cameras, and I walk up to him, and I'm just thinking to myself the whole time, what am I going to say? So I said, well, what would I say to a childhood hero or wrestler? I go, "I loved you as a kid. I used to see you at the Garden. Can I have your autograph?" And he goes, "What's your name?" So again, I start thinking, because we're improving it, and I just go, "Evan." And it dawns on me how surreal this is, that I'm playing myself in a fictional movie. It's just utterly surreal. And the whole experience was magic. And Mickey, I think his performance is iconic. When he does the line, "I'm just a broken down piece of meat," it's like Brando, and on the waterfront, I could have been a contender. I think 100 years from now, people will love and admire and respect that performance when we're all gone. And we're very proud to have made that movie. And the process of making that movie, people have no idea. We shot it in 35 days, 7 5-day weeks, but it took 7 years off and on to do all the business deals and the script rewrites and everything else. 7 years to do The Wrestler. People really can't imagine what goes into making a movie.
And yeah, I mean, it was an iconic movie, like you said. I mean, the character that Mickey Rourke played, is it based on anybody, or is it one of those just pull the rabbit out of the hat? I mean, there's people always say it's based on
it's a myth. People would go, "Oh, it's Jake Roberts." No, it's a composite of various people. He spent a lot of time with Greg Valentine. Greg Valentine was telling him about the business, and they spent a lot of time together. But it wasn't based on any one person. It was various, stories of these guys past their glory. Many of these guys, they're selling out Madison Square Garden one night, and later they're bouncers or pushing a broom or whatever the case may be, because disgracefully, there's no 401ks or pensions or health benefits for them, and the human body is not made to take endless bumps. And wrestlers hate the word fake, because they'll go, my hip replacement wasn't fake, my bad back wasn't fake, my bad knees aren't fake, my 3 divorces weren't fake, and my kid's not talking to me isn't fake. So these guys deserve better. And if you talk to the old school guys, pre-Hulkamania, mid-'80s boom period rock and wrestling, some of these guys were main eventing all over the world, never broke $100,000. Never broke $100,000. So the idiot fans who they all blew it on wine, women, and song, they have no idea what they're talking about. No idea.
I mean, and now wrestlers, they're getting paid, high salaries, and they're just, kind of living the lifestyle and not wrestling as much as the guys back in the day. I mean, they would, like we're going to talk about in a second, 350 days in a row. I mean, they don't do that nowadays. And kind of pivoting to that great documentary, which I mean, I highly recommend folks click on in the show notes. I have a link to purchase and download. And download the documentary. It is great. 350 Days, Legends, Champions, Survivors. I mean, it's got a who's who. I mean, it's got Abdul the Butcher, Lex Luger, Greg Valentine, Mass Superstar, Ted DiBiase, Bret Hitman Hart, Superstar Billy Graham, Paul Orndorff, Wendy Richter, Tito Santana, Angela Mosca, Jimmy Snooker. I mean, among others. I mean, talk about getting into this project. I mean, when I found out about this, the documentary from you, I immediately downloaded it and I could not stop watching it. It was so good. I mean, I'm not a big documentarian watcher, but this one, I mean, this is probably the best one I've ever seen. So.
Thank you. I appreciate it. What happened was another Darren Antola, longtime fan. He loved Don Morocco and Snooker and these early 80s guys, and he's a big 80s wrestling fan. And he's a boxing cut man, and he wanted to, do something different, and he came up with this idea. He also got friendly with some of the wrestlers and boxers, obviously, and so he got this idea: 350 days. Guys like Ric Flair literally wrestled 350 out of 365 days. Greg Valentine, who's a dear friend of mine, he'll sleep on my couch when he's in town. Greg Valentine said to me at his peak he did about 320 days. So, it's accurate. It's accurate. And basically, this idea really came into fruition. They started interviewing all of these wrestlers that you mentioned and many more. They interviewed about 90 wrestlers. And what happened was you can't have a 90-hour documentary. So when I came on board, and pretty much in the same capacity as the wrestler, to just to help the producers in any way possible, I met with the editor, Michael Burlingame, who worked with Paul McCartney, Sting, the singer, not the wrestler, Mariah Carey, people like this. I mean, this guy was not a wrestling guy. And I said to Darren, he's perfect. He's perfect. Because he's going to go through 90 hours of this, and he's going to pick out the most powerful, poignant, funny, material. He's not going to know the legends from the mid-carders, from the quote-unquote jobbers. He's not going to know. He's going to make the best movie possible. And that's what happened. That's what happened. And I think he did a beautiful, heartfelt film. I said to Mike, make a movie that an 80-year-old grandmother who never liked wrestling would cry. I said, that's the movie we want you to make. And that's what he did. It's very poignant, this film. And you don't have to be a wrestling fan. Obviously, if you love wrestling, you'll enjoy it that much more. There's rare footage. There's very rare photos, and some guys you wouldn't even expect to see. Like when I was a kid, the Wolfman came into New York to wrestle Bruno, and not a lot of film crews following the Wolfman around. He's in the film, and there's about 40 wrestlers in this film, and about 36 legends, and it's gotten great reviews, and it's being seen all over the world. It's done well, and we're very proud of it.
I mean, was there when you watched it back? I mean, was there a superstar that was on here that you said, "Hey, I cannot believe that happened to you." I mean, they were talking about superstar Billy Graham. I mean, he had so many surgeries and back problems, knee problems because of the steroid use. I was kind of eye opening. I mean, I heard, but that Bret Hart used steroids to get over an injury that he had. I mean, there are a lot of people that you wouldn't think would use steroids, but used it, in the mid '80s, early '90s, just not to enhance themselves, but to get over injuries. I mean, wrestling 50 plus days a year. I mean, can be a thing that takes a lot of toll on your family, plus your mental health and your physical health.
Well, that's pretty much the theme of the movie. You're away from your kids, and it's Christmas night, and you're wrestling on Starrcade. It's Thanksgiving night, and you're wrestling on Survivor Series. And where's Daddy? Where's Daddy? Oh, he's working. Sorry. It's your graduation, and Daddy's headlining the Garden or the Omni. It's your wedding. Where's Daddy? Oh, he's got a big match somewhere. And that's also what this movie is about. The sacrifices that these men and women, Wendy Richter says, how could I have a baby? I'm on the road every night of the week. How could you have a pet? I'm on the road every night of the week. So the sacrifices physically, emotionally, family-wise, it's not uncommon in wrestling for somebody to have 3 or 4 marriages. How many women are going to put up with this? You're away. You're away. You're just not home. And they were even talking about adultery and the temptations, sex, drugs, rock and roll. It's tough out there. And what's even tougher is when the glory is over. You wake up one day and you're not headlining the Garden, you're pushing a broom. How do you deal with that also?
Yeah, I mean, it's when I was watching the documentary. Of course, folks, like I said before, you can click on the show note links, and it's a one click. You can download it. You can purchase it, and I highly recommend it. It's like when I was watching back, a lot of superfly Jimmy Snuka. I mean, he's no longer with us. I mean, when you look back at the wrestlers that are in this that may or may not be here with us anymore, I mean, does it kind of make you feel better that you were able to be part of this and kind of document, their rise and their sacrifice before they were untimely left us a little early?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's about a dozen people involved with this movie who are gone. Again, it took about 6 years for this project because, people, again, don't really realize what goes into filmmaking. So Don Leo Jonathan's gone, the Wolfman, Larry Sharp, Jimmy Snuka, Ox Baker, George Steele, Angelo Savaldi. They're all in the film, and they're gone. They're gone. And for many of them, it was their last interview. And J.J. Dillon, who's still with us, he's 77 now, he said, you guys preserved history. You guys preserved history. And, the wrestling fans who really love and respect old school will realize, just what this means. And these guys, it was almost like being on the psychiatrist's chair. They poured their hearts out. They really poured their hearts out, and they used phrases like "I'm not proud of," but I cheated. I'm not proud of, but I did this, I did that. There's a lot of guilt. I was away from my kids for weeks and months at a time, and I didn't see them grow up. And
yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that as a person that was that did travel a lot for, and I was just a ring announcer for independent promotions in Georgia. I mean, you're away from home a lot. I mean, I wasn't away 350 days, but it kind of pivoting back. I mean, they were talking about how a lot of these guys, when they were heels and people hate them, they really hated them. Now if someone's a heel, doesn't really matter. They have a Twitter personality that people like. They know that they're not, a bad guy. But did you find it interesting that all these wrestlers that were heels back in the day, pre-internet, that, I mean, they kind of had to fear for their lives, leaving, going to a bar, just leaving the ring, trying to get back to the dressing room?
Oh, yeah. Nikolai said to me that at Madison Square Garden, him and the Sheik had so much heat that they would hide in an ambulance and leave the building mid-show. They were scared to walk out of there. And these were huge, tough guys, Iron Sheik and Nikolai. They said they were scared to walk out of the building. That's the kind of heat that they had. And the internet's changed that, and ironically, Vince changed it because Vince publicly said it's a work.
Yeah, I mean, it's that the fans are really passionate, and a wrestler like you said, Nikolai Volkov and the Iron Sheik. If the Iron Sheik is scared, then he must really be getting over, because I mean, that guy's probably not an easy guy to intimidate and make scared. But if you can make him scared, then he's done his job. I mean, that's what he was paid to do. He's paid to be a bad guy. I mean, they lived in their gimmick 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, they didn't, they weren't. A lot of the guys now, they're heels on the camera, but then on the internet they have a totally different personality where they're, family. They have family-friendly kind of pictures and stuff. It's like you wouldn't see that back in the day. That person would stay in gimmick and character every time that he or she was out in public. So
I tell people today there's very few wrestlers that have legit heel heat. Brock Lesnar is one. Thomas Ciampa, he gets legit heel heat. Not a lot of these guys do. I mean, and it's almost like they want to be liked. They're tweeners or whatever, and sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you really have to be emotionally invested. I want this guy to win. I want this guy to lose. And if they're both basically, playing the same role, it's hard to get too emotionally involved sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely one of those things. I mean, is there? I know we had the 350 days documentary. Is there a thought of doing another one kind of like this, or was this one of those one and done kind of scenarios?
Well, our director, Fulvio Cesare, he's been talking about doing a director's cut because, again, we had 90 or so hours whittled down to an hour 48, which means there's 88 hours of footage out there, and a lot of the guys didn't even make the movie. So there's all the, there's certainly the opportunity to do more with it. So, you never know what could come of it. It could theoretically be a TV series like Viceland's Dark Side of the Ring. I mean, we have 88 hours of footage sitting there unused. So, who knows?
I mean, and kind of speaking of that, the Viceland series, Dark Side of the Ring. I mean, I would assume you were able to. We watched that. I mean, what were your thoughts on that? I mean, kind of the perspective that the twist that they kind of put on it after you were involved in this documentary.
I, for the most part, enjoyed them. The one on the Von Erichs, just seeing Kevin looking kind of haunted and trying to find his peace in the middle of paradise in Hawaii. I had him in my head for days. So it certainly worked. It worked. The one on Brody's death, as a documentarian, I saw the flaws. I think somehow, some way, in a documentary, you have to address both sides. I think they should have somehow gotten somebody from Cologne's side, to tell their version. It was very few people telling the story. Tony Atlas, I remember, was telling much of the story. But as a documentarian, I would have had more people from different sides telling what happened. And I think in that scenario, it wasn't all that it could have been. Although, again, it was disturbing. It was certainly disturbing. So on that level, it did work.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely great. And I've talked to a bunch of people in the business that said, yeah, it was great, but it was not 100% accurate. But, kind of our final question of this interview. I mean, you said you had 88 or 80 plus hours of extra interview, people that didn't make it to the documentary. I would love to know the one or two people that did make it to the documentary that could make it to the director's cut that kind of stood out.
That didn't make it?
That didn't make it. Yeah, any wrestlers that y'all interviewed that you said, hey, that would have been great, but they didn't make the cut.
It's hard to say. A lot of times it comes down to sound quality, and it becomes technical issues. This guy was great, but there's background noise. This guy was great, but there was too much going on, and it just from a technical standpoint, it may not have worked to the degree that we would have liked. But in the final cut that we have, there were guys like Don Leo Jonathan and Butcher Paul Vachon who I would have liked to have seen a lot more of, because these guys had unbelievable lives. Don Leo Jonathan was a scuba diver. Butcher Paul Vachon told me he wrestled in front of 100,000 people in India. You always hear about WrestleMania, the biggest crowd ever. He said he wrestled in front of 100,000 people in India. But it's not on tape, so it's almost like it never happened. Those kind of things I would have liked to have seen more of. But again, in editing a film, you're constantly making choices. And so I would have liked... So I'm not sure if I exactly answered your question, but I would have liked to see more of guys like that. Because when I was a kid, Don Leo Jonathan and Butcher Paul Vachon were huge, huge stars. A lot of people don't really know much before the Hulkamania era. There's not a lot of footage. There's not a lot of... there's just not a lot of material on them. I recently wrote an article about unsung heroes of professional wrestling, and one of my heroes was John the Maniac Tolis, who wrestled Fred Blassie in front of 27,000 people in California on closed-circuit TV before WrestleMania. But he was huge in California. The Olympic Auditorium used to have their TV all over the country, and they erased it every week to save money on the tapes. They erased the show every week. So there's not a lot of footage of John Tolis. So you talk to a lot of fans. His career petered out, right around WrestleMania 1. So it's like, they go, who's John Tolis? And to me, the guy was one of the biggest heels of all time. So, history is a strange thing. It's like sometimes a mediocrity, there's mountains and mountains of material on them, and somebody who deserved a lot more, they're practically forgotten.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's kind of sad. But on that note, Evan Ginzburg, 350 days. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and, just kind of just shedding light on this. I mean, like I said before, it's probably the greatest documentary that I've seen on professional wrestling, and maybe even the best documentary I've seen, just period. So thanks again for coming on.
Yeah, I just want to briefly tell people they could get it on Amazon, iTunes, video on demand, any major cable system will have it, Blu-ray, DVD, and we want to thank the fans for their support. It's been doing quite well on Amazon, and and we want to thank you for your support as well.